we approached the 1990s, a lot of the world was about to see a lot of changes that they actually didn't expect to see in their lifetime. The biggest change that's about to take place is the Soviet Union and what's going to happen to it. The Soviet Union was actually on the brink of collapse, and there are many reasons for that. The Soviet Union actually was starting to go broke. They were having a hard time keeping up with the United States when the United States went all in with their Peace Through Strength program under President Reagan. And President Reagan, as well as other military leaders of the past that invested into our military system through the military-industrial complex, obviously these weapons cost a lot of money, and the Soviet Union was spending that kind of money on their weapons of war. However, it was starting to bankrupt the country, and also the country population was getting bigger, and there was no way to sustain the communist system with such a large country that the Soviet Union actually is. So Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, was trying to make some much needed reforms, and actually this got definitely put on the fast track as much as it could whenever the Chernobyl accident happened, whenever the Soviet Union was trying to keep up their old ways and trying to keep the Chernobyl accident under wraps. This is where a nuclear reactor in modern day Ukraine, in a place called Chernobyl, where the nuclear reactor actually had a breach, where they actually had a meltdown, and this was pretty awful. And the actual reactor that was actually melting down, it was actually starting to reach the water supply. The melting core was actually starting to melt down through the concrete, and it was actually going to reach down through the water supply. Luckily, that was able to be halted, but the Soviet Union actually did have to ask help from outside their own borders because it was too hard to contain. And if this nuclear reactor would have dispersed all its radiation, it actually would have reached Eastern Europe and would have caused nuclear fallout. This is how bad it was. And so Mikhail Gorbachev, already trying to make reforms, now actually had to ask for the West for help in order to solve this huge environmental disaster. All right. And so now with all this happening, and Mikhail Gorbachev wanting to bring much needed reforms to the Soviet Union, well, that's not sitting well with the old guard. That's not sitting well with the old guard. The KGB, that's still in effect to this day, a lot of the oligarchs, and people like Vladimir Putin. Yes, Vladimir Putin actually was around during this time. Obviously, he was much younger in the 80s and 90s, but he was a firm believer of the old ways of the Soviet Union, and he couldn't stand that Mikhail Gorbachev was going to bring back or try to scale back the Soviet Union and try to bring all these reforms. Well, now the Soviet Union just had to face the reality that it could not be sustained anymore. And now the Soviet Union decided to break apart a lot of the countries that were with its borders. Like you had Lithuania, obviously Ukraine, you had the stand countries that are in Asia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. Many of these countries that exist today, well, they were under the Soviet Union as a country. And now all these countries are all these territories that the Soviet Union owned, well, now they're going to be independent countries. And this also goes true with the countries they actually operated under the behind the Iron Curtain. Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, all these countries are now going to be free. And so many people that lived under communist rule as part of basically the deal with the devil that we made after World War II, Poland is now going to be free. So after being under communist rule for decades, now they're going to be liberated. Lithuania is going to be liberated. Former Yugoslavia is now going to be broken apart into 3 countries. That's going to be liberated. And if you talk to many people that lived during the communist era of these Eastern European countries, they're very grateful that they were able to be liberated and they're able to embrace a sense of freedom that they never had for decades. And this is all due to the fact that the Soviet Union has now collapsed. Now, obviously, Russia still exists, but Russia is not the same set of countries and territories that it once was under the Soviet Union. Now, Russia still has a lot of power. Russia still has a lot of nukes. And it's one of the reasons why there's still fear to this day. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of the world doesn't want to get involved with the Ukrainian-Russia conflict, because Russia's nuclear arsenal is still there. Russia's nuclear weaponry and long-range missile capabilities are still there. So that is still a real threat. So we always have to play a delicate dance with Russia as it comes to their old Soviet Union weaponry. But nevertheless, the Soviet Union no longer exists. Communism has broken apart in Eastern Europe, and now you have a very liberated society, and you have a Eastern European bloc that is now becoming more modernized, and now many more people are starting to see what Eastern Europe has to offer, and they really like what they're seeing. The complicated relationship that we have with Iran is, well, it's definitely one that is very questionable, and it's definitely one that is filled with hostilities, as we talk about the Iran hostage crisis, as well as the rise of the Ayatollah after we were able to get rid of the old Iranian government in the 50s and basically put in our own puppet with the Shah. And so our relationship with Iran hasn't been good, and it's definitely gotten much it's definitely gotten hostile over the years, and we still have a hostile relationship with Iran today. But it definitely gets complex in the 80s. So let's talk about why. So when Iran had their revolution, and they got rid of the Shah, and they put in their they put in the Ayatollah as their supreme leader, and basically run run the country under a theological rule under Shiite Islamic law. All right, Shiite Islamic law. Okay, there are two variations that are major variations of Islam. It's Sunni Islamic law and Shiite Islamic law. All right, like both of these organizations, both of these rules of belief, they will not accept the other. They just simply won't. That is. And Shiite Islamic law is what rules Iran today under the Ayatollah and under their leadership. Now, Iraq is actually a Shiite majority population, even in the 80s. It is a Shiite majority population. They follow Shiite law. However, under Saddam Hussein, the former leader of Iraq, he is a Sunni follower, and he practices Sunni Islamic law, and that's what he wanted to push forward. Now, as a leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein did not want Iran to have influence under his people. They simply didn't want that to happen. So Iran and Iraq already were going to have hostilities because of the rise of the Ayatollah Khomeini and how he was starting many people in Saddam Hussein's organization. They thought the Ayatollah was going to destabilize Iraq, and they were going to basically have an uprising there and try to get rid of him. So Iran and Iraq started to go to war. And this was in 1980. And this war lasted 8 years, from 1980 to 1988. And it was a bloody war. We actually did have about 1 million people die in this war, if not more. All right. It was costly. It was deadly. It was destructive. Iran and Iraq went into war that was very fierce. Now, Iraq was supported by us, because obviously Iran was our enemy at the time. Iran had already done their hostage situation. Iran had already started to fund Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in Lebanon, I should say, that and where these terrorists actually attacked American soldiers, Marines that were stationed in Beirut. And so obviously Iran is our enemy, and so we're going to support Iraq publicly, and we sell them weapons. We sell them a good amount of weapons and help them support their fight against Iran. However, this is where the Iran-Contra affair comes into play, where we're trying to stop communism from growing in our side of the hemisphere, but we're not allowed to sell to the Contras anymore because of their obvious violations of human rights, their criminal organizations, their criminal activities. So we need to fund the Contras in a way that is kind of under the table. At least that's for the Reagan administration's justification of it. The Contras were funded through illegal weapon sales to Iran. Wait, Iran? Iran's our enemy. We're supporting Iraq, aren't we? In the Iran-Iraq war, we're supporting Iraq. But yet we're selling weapons to Iran. Well, see, this is our duplicity here. This is where the United States has where especially the Reagan administration, where they're selling weapons to both sides. So they're actually getting benefits from both places. So Iran and Iraq are destroying each other, and we're supplying them with the weapons to do so. So our military, our military companies, our weapon companies, they're making money off this. I mean, the United States is also making a little bit of coin in their pocket in this, because they're making sure that that money is going to get funneled to the Contras, while also we're selling weapons to Iraq and hoping that they actually do some damage to Iran and maybe even win the war, so we can maybe get back into Iran in some form or another and get rid of the Ayatollah. All that's happening right now in 1980 to 1988. Now, Iran and Iraq, they have a stalemate. They have a stalemate in all this. You have millions of people that die and get injured. You have a devastated Iraq. Okay, you have Iran that's been weakened. So all this took 8 years, and nothing really changed. Nothing really changed, except there are more people dead, and Iraq's in serious debt. Iraq's in major debt, and they got to make money fast. All right. Well, right next to Iraq is a small but very wealthy country in Kuwait. All right, a small but very wealthy country in Kuwait. All right. Now Iran, they're not worried about Iran anymore. Right. Iran now has to rebuild. Iran has to take care of their own house right now, because that war was actually pretty bad, the Iran-Iraq war. So that's why we don't hear much from Iran during the 90s, because of that war that was pretty devastating. But we hear a lot from Iraq, because Iraq needs to get money fast. And they see this little bitty wealthy country in Kuwait. And so Saddam Hussein says, I think I'm going to invade this little country. I'm going to take its resources. It's for such a small country, it has a vast amount of energy resources and has made the country very wealthy. So Iraq actually gets their what many people viewed as a very powerful military at the time, and they were able to just barnstorm into Kuwait, get into Kuwait City, and take it over. And so Iraq annexes Kuwait and makes it its own province. Now, this is, as we've learned throughout history, this is a form of imperialism. All right. This is just, it is what it is. All right. The United States has done this. You know, obviously England has done this. Many European countries have done this. So this is just a par for the course deal with the way of the world. So this is now Iraq trying to do its own form of imperialism, take over this country, get its resources, and basically benefit from that. Well, Kuwait has a lot of very powerful friends. Why? Well, obviously because Kuwait's rich, and with a rich buddy like Kuwait, they make good relationships with other countries around the world. They actually have a great relationship with the United States, and so Kuwait is asking for help. Kuwait is like, hey, we need help. Iraq is coming into our country, taking us over. We need something done about this. And so the United States and other countries, they actually form a coalition, and they're saying we better stop Iraq from this aggression, because many people feared that Iraq wasn't going to stop there. They thought they might look into Saudi Arabia, they might look at the Emirates, they might look into Qatar, and because if they allow this to stand, what's going to stop them from taking over other parts of the Middle East? And that's a very valid threat. But you did have a lot of Americans that were not they were not on board with this, and for good reason, because the United States just 17 years ago, actually about 17 years ago, they had pulled out of Vietnam. And obviously, since that time, we learned more about the tragedy of Vietnam, how the government lied to us, how they got us into that quagmire, knowing that it was going to be a difficult fight, knowing that we weren't going to win that war, and knowing that we were basically fighting a lost cause, but yet they pushed us into war anyway. So you had a lot of Americans not believing the United States at this juncture. They just simply didn't believe them. And that was just like, no, we don't want to get involved in this. We don't need to get involved in this war with Iraq and Kuwait. We don't need to do that. But nevertheless, the reason why this one was different is because if Iraq was able to continue and take over Kuwait, there was really a good chance of them going after other countries. And especially this would destabilize the oil markets. And look, the world runs on oil. Even to this day, the world runs on oil. If you ever watch that show Landman, and there's a scene in there where they're talking about wind turbines, and how even if you give them a 30-year head start, it still won't be enough to basically supply our energy demand, because we have a large demand for oil, and that's just around the world. So if that was to destabilize the market then in 1990, well, that's going to be a massive headache for sure. It's going to be a borderline catastrophe. So we needed to get involved. That's how the United States government believed, and that's how all these other governments believe, that we need to get involved in this war. So we do. We actually set up Operation Desert Storm, and now we get involved in the Persian Gulf War, and we go in there. We go into Kuwait. We go into Saudi Arabia, set up shop there, and then we're ready to go attack Iraq. And we're able to destroy Iraq relatively easy. The very feared army of the Iraq army, it was feared. However, the common soldiers that were there, they were not much of a challenge for our United States military and our technology. Our soldiers, our tanks, our missiles, our Patriot missiles in particular, we're just wiping the floor with the regular soldiers, and we're just going roughshod over Iraq. Now, the Revolutionary Guard of Iraq was definitely a tougher foe for the United States to defeat, but we still defeat them. And we're actually able to defeat Iraq in a matter of months. And we're able to get Iraq fully out of Kuwait. And we're actually able to get Iraq out of that country, but not until Iraq actually does a scorched earth policy and starts to burn the oil fields of Kuwait as they leave. So they actually destroyed a lot of the Kuwaiti infrastructure that had to get rebuilt. But nevertheless, we were able to save Kuwait as a whole, and we're able to get them free and liberated from Iraq. Now, Kuwait actually still celebrates that Liberation Day, proudly displaying American flags and thanking the United States for getting them from under our Iraqi rule. So Kuwait actually is still very friendly to the United States. Kuwait is actually got a great relationship with the United States overall, diplomatically. And you have many Americans that still work in Kuwait. And we have a great relationship with Kuwait. And actually, Kuwait actually gave us compensation for that war. Kuwait actually helped cover the cost of the Persian Gulf War. And that brought a lot of change into the country, as they saw, well, okay, we needed to go to war here, and the government was giving us constant updates of the situation. CNN, became a big name because of this war, and this is one of the reasons why 24-hour news became such a big deal, because of the Persian Gulf War. But nevertheless, this decade already starting with a lot of turmoil. You had the Soviet Union on the brink of collapse. You had the Persian Gulf War, and now we're going to talk about the Berlin Wall. The Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. However, something else happened before the Soviet Union fully collapsed. The Berlin Wall, this big symbol of the Iron Curtain that's in the city of Berlin, separated East and West Berlin. And for almost 30 years, this Berlin Wall stood there, separating families, separating livelihoods, separating cultures, right? Separating the German people from each other, actually, and separating people that were once friends and families. Now they could be lucky to see each other just once a year. And people risked their lives trying to get across from the east to the west. And this wall separated that. But with the Soviet Union on the brink of collapse, and now people demanding that this wall be torn down, as famously said by Ronald Reagan in his famous speech, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Well, now that wall is being torn down. Now that wall was going to be torn down in 1989. And this was a massive celebration, as many people in Berlin stood on this wall, got pickaxes, got sledgehammers, started busting down this wall, and Germany was now on the brink of unification. Berlin was now being unified, and now East and West Germany was about to become one country again, It was about to become Germany after, I believe it had occurred in 1991, maybe 1990. But it occurred, just a couple of years at most once the Berlin Wall fell. And that was a huge, huge deal. And to this day, we we benefit from Germany's unification, as we have a lot of companies that are based in East Germany that we actually work with here in the United States. Obviously, we still get a lot of things from the old West Germany. We have Munich, one of the standout cities in West Germany. Now it's still one of the bigger cities. But we just enjoy so much commerce with Germany now. We enjoy a lot of German products, varying from cars, from electronics. And remember, this was actually helped by us as part of our Marshall Plan when we rebuilt West Germany and make sure that they didn't fall under communism during that time, and of course, obviously the Berlin Airlift. But now with Germany being unified and now seeing the benefits of the Marshall Plan now come into effect, now you have a much stronger European nation or European continent with Germany, France, Italy, and all these countries that are all standing out in the 1990s. With the very impressive victory that the United States had in the Persian Gulf War, President Bush actually had gotten about a near 90% approval rating from the American public. It was some sky high number. I believe it was 90%. I'll have to double check on that. So there was no way that he was going to lose the 92 election. I mean, this was in early 1991. What else could go wrong that could cause his presidency to be in serious doubt? Well, the economy is what happened, and the economy actually took a bit of a downturn, and President Bush actually reneged on his promise of no new taxes, where he actually did raise some taxes. And well, America just doesn't like when its money's being messed with. That's just how it is throughout the entire history of the United States of America. When the economy's bad, the president's doing bad. It has been the same way now as it been 20 years ago, 30 years ago, almost 100 years ago when the Great Depression happened. So that's not going to change. So in 1992, the economy was suffering through a recession, and President Bush was getting blamed for it. President Bush was definitely not seen as effective with this setup. He just wasn't. And also, President Bush, he was getting a lot of flack for this setup called NAFTA that was about to be implemented. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, because before NAFTA gets put into place, President Bush is trying to save his job. That's what he's trying to do. And so in the 1992 election, President Bush is up for re-election, and he's going against this upstart named Governor William Jefferson Clinton of Arkansas. People know him as Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton was just, he wasn't viewed as much. He just wasn't. Yeah, he's a smart man. He can be a bit charming, but he wasn't really viewed as like this great hope for the Democratic Party, especially after President Bush's significant bump in the polls after the Persian Gulf War. So President Clinton, many people thought he was just going to be fodder for President Bush, and he was just going to be the sacrificial lamb for the 92 election, because who could beat President Bush at the time? Well, once the economy crashed, then President Bush was starting to suffer, and Governor Bill Clinton, he was actually now able to showcase his communication skills, his skills of empathy, his ability to relate to the American public. So he was actually starting to get a little bit more traction. However, what really set this race off was the entry of a third party candidate by the name of William Ross Perot. Okay, or I'm sorry, H. Ross Perot. Okay, Ross Perot. Okay, who is this man? Who is Ross Perot? Why should we know about him? Well, Ross Perot was an independent candidate, all right? And he got into this race because he thought that President Clinton or President Bush was definitely hurting the economy. Okay, he definitely was hurting the economy, but he thought that Governor Clinton was not going to be an effective person to answer the challenges of the American economy, and he thought that both President Bush and Governor Clinton had a bad take on free trade. And Ross Perot, this billionaire businessman from Texas, was able to get a lot of Americans to listen to him. And he actually was able to be a valuable third-party candidate. Now, why he dropped out initially is still kind of a mystery, even to me. I'm not sure why he did what he did, because he actually was starting to gain some decent momentum, and he might have actually had a better chance of maybe not winning, but definitely getting some electoral votes, maybe winning a few states. But he dropped out, and that's still a mystery. But then he came back. Then he came back into the race, and they had these debates, all right? And then Bill Clinton was actually able to, showcase his charm, whether it be on TV, on like the Arsenio Hall show, and able to kind of go through some of his extramarital affair scandals that he was accused of having. He was able to navigate through that, and then in the debate, he was actually able to relate to the American public with his ability to be empathetic, his ability to understand America's pain. And President Bush actually came off as standoffish. President Bush actually came off as annoyed, like he couldn't believe that he actually had to waste his time talking to the American public about this. One of the more famous moments in the debate is that President Bush is clearly watching his, looking at his watch, just waiting for this to be over. And a lot of Americans got very irritated by that, because like, hey, you're annoyed that you have to do this debate. Well, we're also annoyed that we're losing our jobs. We're also annoyed that we're losing our livelihood here, that we can't get food on the table because our job is gone, and the economy is terrible. So a lot of Americans got very angry with that, and then also Americans got a lot of angry with President Bush's responses in these debates. But Ross Perot, to his credit, was actually able to do a pretty good job in the first debate, where he's actually able to explain how he was able to make some changes to the economy, and how he could understand the Americans' pain as well. His policies, though, were a little bit, they weren't going to be as accepting as he, many people thought that his approach to trying to save the economy was just a little too out there. All right. But one thing that he absolutely could not stand was NAFTA. He could not stand this proposal of NAFTA, because he thought that free trade, allowing companies to move to Mexico or to move to Canada, or allow those workers to come in and basically save costs on labor by relocating and getting cheaper products from Mexico, was going to hurt manufacturing in the country. And that's where he was able to bank a lot of his campaign on. So when the 92 election happened, President Clinton actually did not win a majority of the vote. He got about, I want to say, 43% of the vote. He got 43%, pretty big. He was actually able to beat President Bush by a good margin in terms of popular vote. But he actually never got 50% of the vote. Well, why? What happened? Well, Ross Perot actually took about 19% of the vote. And Ross Perot did get a lot of voters from President Bush, because Ross Perot is definitely more conservative than most people that are running on a third-party ticket, or that are third-party candidates. It was definitely conservative. But many people did flock to Ross Perot because of his policies on NAFTA, and many workers that feared that their jobs were going to be in jeopardy due to NAFTA policies, they did vote for him, that probably would have voted for Governor Bill Clinton. So the third-party candidacy of Ross Perot definitely had a significant effect on the election. And did it give President Clinton the win? I can't necessarily say that, but it definitely affected the race, and it certainly did cause a much wider gap from President Clinton defeating President Bush. Okay, so the 92 election definitely had a significant impact from Ross Perot's third-party candidacy, and President Clinton was about to embark on one of the largest changes of the economic fortunes of the United States. Many Americans to this day look back fondly on President Clinton's presidency. In the 90s, President Clinton was able to have a lot of economic success. All right. Now, it wasn't easy in the beginning, because from 1993 to 1995, President Clinton wasn't that popular because many felt that him raising taxes, many felt that Hillary Clinton, the first lady, getting involved in politics as far as like trying to implement her plans and implement her policies. They thought that she was interfering too much, and people would say, hey, we didn't elect you, especially when it came to healthcare. And her Hillary Care plan, as it got nicknamed, was ridiculed, and many people were not happy with President Clinton and his ways. And this is what caused the uprising of the GOP, and they were able to take back the House with their campaign with Contract to America. All right, the Contract for America campaign, where Newt Gingrich, the future leader of the House, was going to try to scale back the president's responsibilities, and or I should say the president's influence, and basically be a check on his power, because they felt that he was going too far to the left with his liberal policies. All right, and Americans agreed with him, and so they were able to win the House and Senate with a considerable margin. All right. However, this actually turned out to be a great thing for President Clinton. I was like, well, why is that? Why did that become such a great thing? Well, because President Clinton knew how to negotiate. President Clinton knew how to work both sides, and President Clinton knew how to get the public on his side. But also at the same time, he knew how to compromise. And he did make some compromises with the GOP, where they did actually reduce welfare spending. They did do some reduction on government programs. So they did actually reduce a lot of the programs from the Great Society. That did take place. And President Clinton was actually able to benefit from an economy that was surging, an economy that was getting innovative, because now this economy was starting to change with the rise of the internet, the rise of technology. Okay, not just video games, not just videotapes, and not just entertainment becoming more expansive as more Americans are now enjoying the comfort of their home. They don't have to go out as much whenever they want to get entertained. But also, Americans that did look out to go outside and get entertained, they were able to still do so and enjoy all that, in movie theaters, enjoy all that at video rental stores, enjoy all that, at arcades, enjoy all that with options of travel as travel became considerably cheaper. And Americans were getting paid relatively well under this setup, as the 90s economy was very, very strong. It got so good that the budget was actually balanced and Americans actually had a surplus. That's right, there was a budget surplus because the 90s economy was going great. The internet was coming off strong. People were just getting amazed with this. Wow, we can do so much with this new technology here. I can read stories online. I can actually buy stuff online. This is when Amazon started to come about. I've been a loyal customer to Amazon since 1999 myself. And people were just like, man, this is actually pretty neat. You can actually bring stuff to your house and you can order it at one place. You can order stuff on a website. This is just so neat. The new possibilities with this internet that we now take for granted was just booming, and people were just ready to take charge of this new way of commerce, this new way of communication, and all these companies started to pop up, and all these jobs were starting to pop up, and it was a great time for America. And like I said, President Bill Clinton benefited from this significantly. Although the economy was strong in the 1990s, life wasn't great all the time in the 1990s. Let's make sure of that. You actually still had a lot of significant racial tension during the 90s. It was definitely discussed, and it was definitely put into art in terms of music, in terms of movies. This is actually the rise of rap that was occurring during the late 80s, early 90s. Artists like Tupac Shakur, it spoke about the issues of police brutality and racism, as well as other rappers like Public Enemy. What was going on during this time? Well, many people felt, and during the time of the 90s, that many minorities, whether it be Hispanic, but definitely African American, were being profiled unfairly by the police. And this actually came to a head in 1992 whenever a person by the name of Rodney King was pulled over by the police. Now, they were trying to pull him over because he was drunk driving, and he did speed off. He was trying to escape. However, once they got him, they actually pulled him out of his vehicle, and they started to beat him pretty fiercely, as the frustrations of the chase got put onto public view. The reason why this resonated so much to a lot of Americans, and to a lot of African Americans in particular, is because many African Americans were people that experienced this in other cities, and especially in LA, that still happened in LA, that this was actually definitely not the first time this happened. This was not, they've been telling stories about this where they were being unfairly treated, where they were beaten, where their rights were being violated, but nobody would believe them. And this was finally captured on footage. This was finally captured on by a tourist who captured 4 officers beating up Rodney King. All right. So whenever those officers got put to trial, well, the jury, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was, I have to check on this. I believe it was a jury of 11 Anglo-Americans and maybe 1 minority that was on the jury. And they found these officers not guilty, despite the evidence, despite the video showing clear police brutality. So they were found not guilty. And this really angered a lot of Americans. They're like, okay, we get it. We get it that Rodney King was definitely in the wrong by running from the police. But the clear, savage beating that he took, well, they felt that was very excessive, and Rodney King got severely beaten. And, well, this was just like, I can't believe what I just saw. Like, it's literally on tape, and they have to answer to nothing for this. And the frustration of many Americans was now just reached a breaking point. You're like, okay, you're telling me that even on video, even clear as day evidence showing that this happened, you're saying that it's still not good enough? You're saying that they're still going to get away with it? And this is where it just exploded. Like, it exploded, and then you had the riots break out in 1992 in LA. The LA riots were a significant tragic event where you had the frustrations of a public, and the way that it unfolded was pretty bad. You had businesses being burned down. You had a lot of Korean shops in the area. Once again, there was a lot of racial tension within those communities. Where you had many African Americans feeling that the Korean shop owners did not treat them with the respect that as customers that they deserved. But you also had a lot of Koreans that said, "Hey, we invested in these places, and we're providing we're providing goods and services here, and now our shops are being targeted by the rioters." And it was ugly. It was ugly, and you can see plenty of videos right now of the '92 LA riots and how awful it got. And then you actually see moments of violence captured live that was pretty graphic, and this shocked a lot of Americans. And now the President Bush, at the time, he was president at the time, well, he had to do something to stop this. And so he actually sent the National Guard deployed with tanks there and to try to quell the rioting. But also at the same time, Rodney King himself actually spoke, had a press conference, and he actually kind of got mocked for it in a lot of comedy sketches at the time. But his words actually still resonated, where he said, "Can't we all just get along?" That was his famous words. He said, "Can't we all just get along?" And he's still recovering from his injuries. And then you had a situation in I want to say 1997, when in New York, where you had another situation where you had police officers viciously arresting someone and then attacking someone in a pretty vile way by the name the person that was the victim, his name was Abner Larima, and then he was attacked by a person by the name of Officer Volpe. And this actually got a lot of significant news. And now you're starting to see more and more of these stories come out of police brutality and witnesses now coming forward and saying that this is going on. And so this is kind of the genesis of all that now coming to light in terms of getting mass media coverage during the 90s. This is where you start to see a lot more Americans speak out against it, and they still do to this day. You go to the Tamir Rice situation. You have the situation with George Floyd and others that actually got a lot of notoriety. President Bill Clinton. The Republicans actually would, kind of do it in a derisive manner. They call him Slick Willie because he would frustrate them. Well, why? Why would President Bill Clinton frustrate them? Well, because Bill Clinton was able to just escape political scandal, and it would just frustrate them so much because President Bill Clinton, well, he's not going to win Husband of the Year. He just simply is not. He's definitely had extramarital affairs that got fully exposed by a multitude of his mistresses, and he had to pay a few settlements, namely one by the name of Paula Jones, where he was accused of harassing her, and he paid her off. Did he do it? I don't know. I mean, I can't really say that he did, but he certainly paid her $800,000. But that didn't hurt him. It didn't hurt him politically. It just didn't. And the Republican Party was just getting so frustrated that nothing could stick to this man. However, President Bill Clinton's presidency did get quite a bit of a shock, I should say, whenever he did have an impeachment scandal. All right, well, what happened? Well, during President Clinton's one of his extramarital escapades, he met this intern by the name of Monica Lewinsky, and Monica Lewinsky worked for him. And, well, President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky engaged in a relationship. All right. Now, the issue with that, obviously, there's a lot of issues that are definitely that are problematic here. All right, because President Clinton is Monica Lewinsky's boss. All right, President Clinton definitely should not be doing this because he actually has significant influence over his employee. All right. So he's already abusing his power there. All right. Now, President Clinton was asked about this affair, and he basically denied it. He denied that he had a relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Well, now there was evidence that he did have an affair with Ms. Lewinsky. And now the Republican Party's like, yes, we got him. We finally got him. We're going to impeach him. We're going to impeach him for obstruction of justice because he was lying. He was lying to the investigators, basically halting the investigation, making things harder, perjury, and also they could highlight his abuse of power by basically taking advantage of a subordinate. And so the Republican Party thought they had a winner here. However, there was just only one major problem. America really wasn't that concerned by it. Now, they are embarrassed. They were definitely just frustrated with President Bill Clinton, but the economy was going strong. It's like, listen, we're doing fine. We don't want to rock the boat. Okay, granted, I'm not happy with what President Clinton's doing. I'm not happy that what he's done here. So they're not happy with President Clinton personally, but they said this is not worth him losing his job over. So this impeachment scandal that brought up a lot of attention to Washington and to a lot of the American public, as more sordid details came out about this, with the special investigations done by Ken Starr, as well as witnesses to the investigation and to the incident, as far as like President Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, flirting and talking to each other. And, it just seemed like tabloid fodder for a lot of Americans. And they're like, this man doesn't need to lose his job over it. And people thought that the economy's going good. You Republicans are wasting valuable time, valuable dollars. And then to make matters worse, a lot of Republicans were caught literally with their pants down too, because they were caught, with them having extramarital affairs. They're claiming to be holier than thou, saying that, if I was president, I should resign, because if I was caught having an extramarital affair, well, they were caught having extramarital affairs. And that was just like, Americans like, okay, this hypocrisy is just a little too much. And we're getting kind of sick of this. All right. We don't like what President Bill Clinton did. But once again, our economy's doing good. Don't you have something better to do? Like maybe help make sure that we can fix whatever issues that are going on with the world today, or what's going on with our here in the United States. Maybe work on healthcare, something like that. So a lot of Americans weren't going to approve of Bill Clinton being impeached. And so you actually had quite a few Republicans actually not vote for the impeachment, especially in the Senate. So the House actually did push it forward because they had such a large majority of members there. So they were actually able to get President Clinton impeached through the House, but that actually would hurt them in the long run in the midterm elections, as in 1998, the House actually lost seats, and so did the Senate. The Senate lost Republican, the House lost, the GOP lost House seats, I should say, and the GOP lost seats in the Senate as well, because they thought that this trial, this pursuit of this was just a little ridiculous. And so President Clinton, once again, standing the test of political scandal, and basically coming off as unscathed, and the Republican leadership was very frustrated. However, as you hear from Monica Lewinsky now, she's actually looking back at it, and she's actually very scarred by it, actually. And she did realize that, she was probably put in a bad position where the president actually did abuse his power. The president did have too much influence on her. And she also, at the time, she was definitely mocked. She was definitely made fun of. And she definitely was basically the butt of many jokes for many of the public. A lot of the Tonight Show, the late shows, they just had a field day with Monica Lewinsky jokes. And it was pretty rough on Miss Lewinsky. And she talks about that now. But nevertheless, it is a scandal that happened. It is a scandal that involved the president, and President Clinton was actually able to come unscathed with it. And this was the second impeachment scandal that occurred in our history, and now we've had 4 impeachments. The economy is going strong. President Clinton is able to escape impeachment, and things are going great. So there's no reason that the Democrats should lose the election. Bill Clinton obviously can't run for a 3rd term, but Vice President Al Gore is part of the White House, and quite frankly, he should be able to carry on the legacy of President Bill Clinton and his plans, and Al Gore is able to sustain some popularity, right? So why is this election in doubt? Why would the 2000 election be remotely close? It shouldn't be. Well, there is a multitude of problems with Al Gore. One, he wasn't likable. All right, that's just the truth. Al Gore came off as very condescending. Al Gore was a brilliant man. I mean, he actually is still a brilliant man, but he kind of let Americans know that he was a brilliant man, and he came off as very condescending, very standoffish, and many people felt that he was just like an irritant because he was very arrogant and he was very just full of himself. That's how they viewed him. They viewed Al Gore as an unlikable fellow. He didn't have the charm of a President Bill Clinton. He came off as robotic, and a lot of the things that he did came off as staged, scripted, and he was trying to be something that he was not. And people kind of saw through that charade, and so they didn't like Al Gore personally. They thought he was a brilliant man, of course, but they didn't like him personally. And on the other side, you have Governor George Bush of Texas, who wants to run for president after having a successful run as governor from 94 to 2000, where he actually was able to unseat Governor Ann Richards in his governor's race in Texas in 94, and then he was actually able to easily win re-election in 98, with Texas having a pretty good run of economic strength during his time. And Governor Bush says that he wanted to bring honor back to the White House because the scandals of President Bill Clinton, his extramarital affairs, it was starting to weigh a lot of Americans down because they were just getting frustrated with his lack of personal accountability. And, you know, even though the economy was going good, they didn't want him to be removed in the manner of impeachment. They still were embarrassed by these scandals. And Governor Bush was actually able to tap into that and basically try to bring back some integrity into the White House. At least that's what he viewed his White House was going to be. So President Bush, I keep on saying President Bush. So Governor Bush and Vice President Al Gore, they had this election in 2000. Now, Americans weren't too really thrilled with either candidate, to be honest with you. They thought that Governor Bush wasn't that intelligent. They viewed him as a nice man, but they'd get along with him, but they actually didn't want him running the presidency. They didn't want him running the White House because they thought that his intelligence wasn't as definitely not on the level as Al Gore, and definitely not up to the job of president himself. So he would actually get made fun of in a lot of the late night shows with his answers and his frustrations with not being able to answer some particular questions. But Al Gore, like I said, he was not liked by a lot of the American public because of his outright arrogance, his condescending ways. And so Americans weren't really too happy with their presidential choices. And you had the candidacy of two other people by the name of Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan. Now, Ralph Nader in particular was one to keep an eye on because Ralph Nader was trying to get 5% of the electorate to vote for him, because if you got that 5%, then you're actually able to get federal funding for your party. He ran the Green Party. And then Pat Buchanan ran the Reform Party. Now, Pat Buchanan is a diehard conservative, and he thought that President Bush was not conservative enough. So he was going to take votes from President Bush. Didn't turn out to be that much, but it actually still was of consequence, especially when we talk about other states. Now, Ralph Nader in particular was definitely taking a lot more votes from Al Gore and his Democratic Party, because his policies were definitely much more liberal. They were more consumer friendly. They were more environmental friendly. So that definitely favored more liberal policies, more democratic policies. So you had this election. And now there's a multitude of problems here. There wasn't actually a lot of participation of the vote. You did only have about, I want to say, 55% of the eligible American public vote. So it's not like this was a large gathering of people that voted in the election like we actually relatively have now. We actually have a large amount of the electorate voting in bigger numbers now. So that's going on. So you have a public that's not too keen on these candidates. All right. And then you have the issue of the states being called too early. All right. So when the election happened, Al Gore was called. Al Gore was said to have won the state of Florida. Now, Florida actually has 2 time zones, just like Texas has 2 time zones. All right. So Florida is in the eastern, and its panhandles in the central. Now, the central time zone of Florida is very Republican. Very Republican. All right. It is probably like 65-70% that was probably going to vote for Governor Bush. It's something of that nature. You know, it's a large percentage that was going to definitely vote for him in the election. Well, they called Florida early. They called it around 7:40, 7:30, somewhere around there. They called it early. And so you had many people in the panhandle hear this. They're in line. They're in line ready to vote. And as soon as they hear that, they get out of line. They get out. They're like, oh, he lost. Why do I need to vote for it? They called the state. So you had thousands of people get out of line in the panhandle that were waiting in line to vote. So they get out of line. Well, then now Governor Bush, he's defiant. He's like, no, I have not lost the state. The state and the network called it too early. And they actually did. the network actually did call it too early, and that is actually kind of suspicious in itself. But we'll discuss that another day. But the state being called before the Central Time Zone even closed, that was baffling. It really was. But nevertheless, the networks then said, "Oh my goodness, we messed up here. We got to retract this statement. We got to retract that Al Gore did not win Florida. Al Gore did not win this state." So they said, "We have a correction to make, that Florida is now back in play. Florida is now back in play." And then to top matters off, Al Gore loses his home state of Tennessee, because Tennessee became more Republican oriented, more conservative. And so Al Gore actually, from Tennessee, lost his actual home state. So that was a big deal. That was a very big deal, that Al Gore could not even carry his home state of Tennessee. Well, then as the night went on, as the votes being getting counted, and President Bush won a couple of bellwether states. He won Ohio, but he also couldn't win some other key states. He couldn't win New Hampshire, or did he? Okay, let me see. I have to check on that. I know he didn't win Maine, but there was actually another couple of states that he did not win. No, he did win New Hampshire. Take that back. But there was actually some other key states he could not win. He could not win Pennsylvania. He could not win Michigan. He could not win Minnesota. So he was actually behind. He was actually behind Al Gore. So, but Al Gore also didn't have enough votes, and it all came down to Florida. It all came down to Florida. And as the votes kept coming in and in and in, and that margin, President Bush had a small, but it was a decent enough margin. All right, and we're talking like thousands of votes, so it's not like it was like, you know, a big wide margin, but just enough to be where you can be declared a winner, right? Well, oh my goodness, President Bush got declared the winner of Florida, and he won the presidency. And everybody's, you know, they think it's over, the race is over, President Bush won. And Al Gore, his supporters are just crestfallen. They can't believe what's happening. But Al Gore actually himself, he's like, "No, I'm not accepting this, because it's not over yet. There's some issues going on here." Well, then the votes kept coming in and in, and then more tallies came in to Miami-Dade County from Broward County, and all of these totals came in. And then when the counting finally stopped, President Bush was only up by like 1,700 votes out of nearly 6 million. All right? 1,700 votes out of 6 million voters. All right? Now keep in mind, President Bush actually had voters in the Panhandle get out of line. And we're talking probably thousands of voters getting out of line in the Panhandle. However, on the other side, you had Al Gore, where there were many African Americans that were taken off voter rolls, and because their names were actually checked off on a no registry felon list. And so you actually had African American voters who had similar names that were on the felon list, that because as a felon, you're not allowed to vote. So their names were actually taken off the list, and those voters usually vote Democratic. All right. So like I said, like for example, there was a John Smith, and he was a convicted felon. Well, of course, there's going to be a lot of John Smiths, right? Well, a lot of those John Smiths actually got taken off the voter roll, so they weren't able to vote, and they weren't able to get that corrected in time. So there was a lot of dirty politics in play here. And one of the reasons why that was very controversial is because Governor Bush, his brother, Jeb Bush, was the governor of Florida. All right? So that was very, very iffy. The Secretary of State was Katherine Harris, a GOP representative. So now she was going to clearly favor the GOP side. So as the vote tally started to come in after the election day was over, the margin got so close, it ended up being at 537 votes after a recount. And now we're like, oh my gosh, 537 votes. 537 votes is what separated Governor Bush from winning the presidency and Al Gore from maybe also winning the presidency. This was crazy. It's just, what's going to happen here? Well, now you had a lot of, I wouldn't say shenanigans, but you definitely had a lot of confusion, anger, and there's a lack of clarity. It's like, well, how are we going to resolve this? Because the issue is that there were some votes, undervotes, where people were trying to press the tabs of the paper ballot and it wasn't punching through. And so people thought that those votes should count because their clear intent was to vote for Al Gore, but they couldn't press the paper through the puncher, right? Because they used this butterfly paper ballot. That's what they used. They used this ballot where they used this hole puncher and they pressed it through. This butterfly ballot caused a lot of confusion because the way that it was set up is that they actually had to put this butterfly ballot in this, basically in the slot, and then they're able to use the hole puncher and butterfly booklet in order to determine how they get their votes in. So this is what they do. And this created a big mess, especially in Palm Springs, okay, or Palm Beach, I should say, in Palm Beach. So in Palm Beach, there was a lot of confusion there, and this probably cost Al Gore a lot of votes. All right. So all this was going on. They're trying to do all these court cases, trying to say how our votes going to be counted, how our votes going to be tallied. So first off, President Bush or Governor Bush is actually able to win the first round of court case victories. He's able to win those. And then the Supreme Court that votes more liberal, they actually start to side with Al Gore in terms of the recount goes. Well, then President Bush then sues Al Gore to go to the Supreme Court and get the Florida Supreme Court decision overturned so they can go back to square one. Well, then as they get back to square one, the Florida Supreme Court actually votes in favor of Al Gore for a full statewide recount. Well, President Bush actually says, no, this is not fair because you're using a different standard on how to count votes. It's not fair. It's not equal protection. So they're saying it violates the 14th Amendment. So this 14th Amendment, they're feeling is being violated towards their voters because their voters are not being counted the same way as Al Gore's voters, because Al Gore is only trying to get 4 counties counted in a certain way. Even with the statewide recount, you still have an unfair setup of how votes are going to be tallied and how they're going to be counted. So that's already a big issue. So the Supreme Court hears these arguments. The Supreme Court hears this. And it is a huge deal, as the election is still 40 days undecided on how this is going to be resolved. Well, there are 2 decisions that occurred with Bush versus Gore. It's the 7-2 decision that people always forget about, that the Florida Supreme Court's decision was overturned. They said the Florida Supreme Court was wrong in the way that they did the statewide recount. They had no way, they should have not done that. And that actually was really not in dispute. You only had 2 of the more liberal justices say that was that they agree with the Florida Supreme Court. But 7 justices said that the Florida Supreme Court was wrong. People forget about that. Well, why? Why do people forget about the majority decision overturning the Florida Supreme Court, saying that the statewide recount should have happened? All right, it's for at least the way they implement it. Well, because it's 2 parts. All right, so the 7-2 decision overturned the Florida Supreme Court and how they did the recount. All right, and the Florida Supreme Court was viewed to do that wrong. All right. The issue was the remedy. The issue is, well, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to make sure that Governor George Bush's 14th Amendment rights and how they can get their counts counted correctly in a proper manner? Well, that's where it becomes a 5-4 decision. All right. The 5-4 decision is due to the fact that there was no remedy to get this resolved before the deadline of December 12th. They said that there's not enough time to get this fixed, and we just have to go by what the Secretary of State, Catherine Harris, and her office Catherine Harris, I should say, had to say about, how this race was going to be decided by 537 votes. So the Supreme Court says we are out of time. We are out of time. There's no way that we can determine who a winner can be as far as like trying to get a new setup of counting, a new setup of a standard, a new way of trying to get a proper count, a proper recount with a set standard throughout the state. There's just no way we can do this. And so you're out of time, Vice President Gore. We just have to go by with what the Secretary of State office says in Florida has to say. And Governor Bush is now declared the winner of Florida. That's it. So that's the dispute. The dispute is not overturning and stopping the Florida Supreme Court's decision of the recount. That's not a dispute. All right. That was actually many legal scholars believe that probably was the correct decision. What what's in dispute even to this day was the remedy. It's the remedy. All right. And many people felt that the Supreme Court stepping into this case in the first place was already problematic because it's a state issue. But they also felt that, well, if you're going to use a 14th Amendment issue, well, can't you, and you're trying to get voters their right to vote, well, can't you just extend the deadline? Can't you just do something of that nature? This is a presidency, for crying out loud. And they said that this decision was not a just one because, you might have disenfranchised too many voters. Well, go back to that 537 margin, all right? Now, Ralph Nader got about, if I'm not mistaken, he got about 3% of the vote in Florida, all right? 3%. It's a lot, right? Got 3% of the vote. So, it's pretty clear he got about, tens of thousands of votes, right? Tens of thousands of votes. And the vast majority of those votes were going to go to Al Gore. There's a reason why people hate Ralph Nader on the liberal side. All right? There's a big reason why people hate this man. Now, once again, you can't blame the voter. The voter votes for who they want. All right? And as a politician, you are to earn everybody's vote. But they also viewed this as like, hey, you took away Al Gore's votes. Those votes probably would have gone to Al Gore. Even if half of them would have stayed home, those voters probably would have voted for Al Gore and he would have won Florida. You cost Al Gore the presidency and you cost the liberal agenda the presidency. So Ralph Nader played a significant role as a spoiler. All right? He definitely had a much more impact than Pat Buchanan did in terms of hurting Governor George Bush and his chance at the presidency. Ralph Nader was definitely more consequential. All right? But this election, this 2000 election, one of the most controversial elections in our history, how it unfolded, how it was decided, how it was just crazy to think that out of nearly 6 million voters, that the outcome was decided by 537 votes. All right? 537 votes. All right? The senior class of Permian High School has 900 kids. All right? That's almost more than double than the margin of victory that President Bush had in Florida out of 6 million votes. Yes, your vote does count. Yes, your vote matters. And this definitely shows why. When President Bush got elected into the White House, there's definitely a lot of protests and a lot of people didn't want to recognize his presidency because they felt that he stole the election from Al Gore. Now, those feelings were still very raw up to 8 months into his presidency. When we got to the month of September and we got to the day of September 11th, it was just supposed to be a relatively normal day. It was actually considered a very pretty day in New York. It was a gorgeous sunny morning. And President Bush was actually I believe in Florida, where he was going to be reading to school children, promoting his No Child Left Behind Act that he is implementing throughout the country. Now, as this was going on, there was actually a 4 planes that were about to be hijacked. And the first plane that was hijacked that came from Logan International Airport by the name of the leader of the hijackers, his name was Mohammed Atta. And he was the one that led the hijackers into the cockpit. And he was actually the one that was the leader of all the hijackers that set up the plan. All right. And they're the ones that did the flight training. They're the ones that did the flight training at the schools, paid the good amount of money to get the license, learning how to fly a commercial airliner. And as they were doing this, Mohammed Atta and his hijackers stormed the cockpit that was flying from Boston's Logan International Airport, and it actually turned back around because I don't even think it was supposed to go to New York City. I think it was actually supposed to go to LA. I believe that was its destination. But as the plane was hijacked, Mohammed Atta then got the plane controlled and actually started to veer it towards New York City. And then he put the plane in full speed ahead. All right. Now, if you've ever been in a plane, you're not going to see what's in front of you, obviously. However, if you are in the sides and you're seeing the window, you're definitely seeing that you're not where you're supposed to be. And as you approach, you're getting closer to New York City, you're seeing that, hey, something's not right here. And they know that they're obviously they've been hijacked. They know that something bad is happening right now, especially with the flight attendants being attacked and being actually killed, and then the pilots themselves being killed. So they know that this is a very dark situation that's going on right now, but nobody knew what was really in store except for the hijackers and Al-Qaeda themselves. And so Muhammad Atta got the plane and he started just going full charge. And the plane was starting to get into the New York metro area. And then it had a beeline towards the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And I think it was going at 400 to 500 miles an hour. And it just smashed into the upper part of the World Trade Center, the North Tower. And that plane just got into the tower and just straight up disintegrated. And this huge, big ball of fire just came out. And everything that was within those floors was basically just incinerated. And in just that fireball going probably around over 1,000 degrees, just catching, just exploding like that. And then that jet fuel just burning, piping hot. And it is just a horrible sight to see. When the World Trade Center got hit, people didn't know what was going on. They're like, there's a big hole in the World Trade Center and there's clearly an airline hit it. And they're like, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what happened, what kind of accident. This is definitely a huge tragedy. We just can't figure out what's going on here. And people are scrambling. They had no idea that this was actually a terrorist attack at the time. But they knew that something was definitely, obviously definitely something was definitely wrong. But this just didn't seem like an accident. Like this seemed like, well, what's going on here? People were confused, but they couldn't jump to conclusions yet. And as they were discussing about what's going on with this particular plane that hit the North Tower, and as news coverage was on the North Tower, now they see a plane coming in. They see another plane coming in. And it's got a beeline too, and now it's going towards the South Tower. And witnesses see all this unfold as this airliner just going straight into the South Tower, direct hit. And everybody could see that this was definitely no accident. This was clearly on purpose. And America saw this live. They saw that this airliner was hitting the South Tower and it was direct hit. And now everybody knew that this was an attack. This was definitely a terrorist attack. And there was no doubt what was going on with the North Tower, that this was clearly a coordinated attack that was going on in the United States. So now the World Trade Centers, both the North and the South Towers, have been hit with a jumbo liner, and it's a horrible sight. And now everything stops as people are now seeing that America is now under attack. They're seeing that the icons of capitalism, the World Trade Center, this icon that represents New York City, the tallest buildings in New York City. And it's just now both towers are on fire. Both towers are now with all the smoke coming out, and already scores of people have already perished. And it is just a horrible sight to see. And now you're seeing all this unfold. And then there's another attack that's about to happen at the Pentagon. The Pentagon is attacked, right? The Pentagon gets attacked in the same manner. A direct hit as an airliner just slams into the Pentagon straight on. And the design of the Pentagon is what allows it to not have such a much larger, score of dead bodies there at the Pentagon because of the way it's designed. Now, granted, it still directly hit the Pentagon and it did considerable amount of damage. But considering that the hijackers probably wanted to do a lot more damage to the Pentagon, they're actually able to just get a small section, but it still killed hundreds of people. All right, but the attackers really wanted to kill thousands. And as the Pentagon attack is happening, as the Pentagon attack is taking place, the South Tower, the weight and the melting steel is now starting to hurt the beams of the World Trade Center. And all this fuel is burning in the North and South Towers. The jet fuel that's burning, melting all the steel. And now the South Tower starts to collapse. And the South Tower collapses live on television. And people are just horrified of what they're just witnessing right now. That the South Tower is now in a full collapse. All right, the South Tower is now in a full collapse. And then a fourth attack happens, and this was what confuses a lot of people, is that it's in an open field. Like it's in this place called Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I said, why would the terrorists attack here? Why would they attack here? People didn't understand what was going on. Like, this didn't hit anything. What happened here? This fourth plane, it just lands in an open field. What went wrong? People were just confused. Like, we're already under attack, and this plane just lands in an open field. What were they trying to get here? People thought maybe there's a secret nuclear plan there, or something of that nature. There's a lot of scenarios going on during this chaotic time. President Bush already got informed of the tower attacks earlier in the day when he was reading to the school children, and then Dick Cheney, the vice president, gets placed in a safe bunker, so he doesn't get attacked, or he doesn't become target. All right, so that's happening right now. That's happening during this whole time. So the Pentagon's attacked. The South Tower has now collapsed, and now the North Tower it's on the brink of collapse. And as the South Tower, all the smoke and fire that has just plumaged southern Manhattan, now the North Tower starts to collapse. The North Tower collapses, and all that smoke, all that weight just comes down, just stacks upon stacks of floors just falling down on each other. And all the brave firefighters and all the brave policemen that tried to save people in the towers, well, now, if they aren't able to get out, they're now trapped with the towers now falling on them. And as well as many of the innocent people that were in these buildings, the towers have collapsed. All right. And even before the towers collapsed, you had people that were above the hit zones of the North and South Tower that had no way to get down because the stairs in between those floors no longer existed. And even if they tried to get down, the heat was so scorching hot that there's no way they could get through it. This is a full-blown terrorist attack. And at the end of it all, you had almost 3,000 people die from this attack. Okay, you had thousands more injured from this attack, and the American lives were forever changed in this attack. And then remarkable acts of heroism were now going to be documented, as we've now found out what happened when the plane landed in plane crash landed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, or crashed, I should say, in that open field. Well, what happened was that on United Flight 93, the people knew that they were doomed on this flight. And it turns out that the hijackers had two targets for this fourth plane. It was either going to be the White House or the U.S. Capitol. That's what they were targeting. And the people on the plane saw that they were doomed, that there was no way that they were going to survive this, that they were basically going to be marked for death. And they said, well, we're going to go ahead, storm the cockpit. We're going to go out on our shield. We're going to, save as many people as we can, and we're going to at least die trying. All right. And that's exactly what they did. They were actually able to overtake the hijackers that were in the passenger area. They were actually able to overtake them and then get to the cockpit. And they were trying to bust through the cockpit door. And I think they did breach the cockpit door. But before they could actually get control of the plane, or actually fight for control of the plane, I got to see if this is correct. Y'all might want to correct me on this. But the pilot of the hijacking pilot actually then decided to get the wheel of the plane, of the steering wheel of the plane, and then just tilt it, have it go upside down, and then nosedive bomb into the ground at a full rate of speed. I'm not sure if they were fighting control over that, but definitely that's what it did, that the plane actually did go upside down a bit and then kind of plunge down. And that's what happened. The people of United Flight 93 saved hundreds of more Americans from dying at the hands of these terrorists, but of course they also perished, sacrificing their lives to save others. Now, this was definitely a dark day in American history. It probably, people say it was definitely darker than Pearl Harbor because of, Pearl Harbor, definitely caught us by surprise and attacked our military personnel in Hawaii. And this was an attack on American citizens, in actual cities, or like our actual soil got attacked for the first time in our history, or an enemy was actually able to get to our shores from the inside and attack us with their own planes. And this was very, very, this shook our psyche for many, many years. And in fact, it still does affect us to this day. That's why you have to go to airports so early to check in, check your luggage. Sometimes you have to take off your shoes, take off your belts, the stuff that you carry on, they have to double check. And you're only allowed to carry like small little travel size bottles and all these other restrictions now. That's all because of the September 11th attacks, because of all this that happened. It was horrifying. It was definitely, a moment in history that, definitely is one that was definitely truly horrifying to experience. People will always remember where they were when that day happened. I know for me, I was actually getting ready to go to Texas Tech. And then I was actually getting ready to go to class when all this unfolded. And just how vulnerable we were, and how I couldn't believe that this happened. And the two landmark icons of New York City were, by the end of September 11th, they no longer were there. And all you saw in New York City and Lower Manhattan was just remnants of the buildings filling the air. And even from shots from high above, that's all you saw was just smoke covering the entirety of Manhattan Island. And it was definitely one of the most just a moment that you just will never forget, and a moment that's very scarring. So what was our response to September 11th? What did we do to respond to these terrorist actions? Well, first off, we got to find out who it was. We eventually find out that it was Al-Qaeda that attacked us, led by Osama bin Laden, and Ayman al-Zawahiri is the main mastermind, along with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. These were the people that set up the September 11th attacks. These were the ones that were protected by the Taliban in Afghanistan. They are the religious sect that leads Afghanistan and has a strict Islamic law. It's called Sharia law that they lead Afghanistan through. And the Taliban was definitely protecting Al-Qaeda and giving them refuge and allowing them to set up their plans there, their plans of terrorism there. So the United States now implements a war on terror as President Bush is ready to send combat troops to Afghanistan, take out the Taliban, and take out as many Al-Qaeda fighters as possible. And this actually was a relative success, as they're able to destroy a lot of the Al-Qaeda fighters. They're actually able to get Osama bin Laden stuffed out, but they don't capture him, unfortunately. He's actually able to escape. The Taliban does get decimated. The Taliban does get removed from power. And they're able to get rid of the Taliban, and then the United States was able to set up a government there in Afghanistan to try to help rebuild. That becomes a whole nother mess in itself, but we'll talk about that another day. But also here at home, there's a lot of changes that take place. There's now a new department called the Department of Homeland Security, specific to try to help stop terrorist attacks from coming from the inside, protecting our borders, protecting our airports, protecting our modes of transportation, our bridges, making sure that terrorists aren't able to implement attacks there. And also the addition of the 2001 Patriot Act, because what happened was a lot of our intelligence agencies, they weren't communicating with each other. The CIA, the FBI, and others, they weren't communicating with each other, and they needed a way to find out how they can communicate and streamline all their acts together. But the main thing is that both the CIA and the FBI knew that Muhammad Atta and these terrorists were actually here in the United States. They knew, but they did not know how they were communicating, because they knew that they were up to something, but they couldn't pinpoint it. And they needed to make sure that this didn't happen again. So the 2001 Patriot Act allowed the government to spy on Americans without warrants. All right, because they knew that Muhammad Atta and his group were up to something, but they didn't have any reason to, or they didn't have any warrants to listen to them, right? They didn't have any jurisdiction to listen to them. Well, now with the 2001 Patriot Act, now the government can now spy on you without, proper warrants or proper going through the proper procedures like they did in the past. Many Americans feel that this is definitely a violation of our civil liberties, because now you're being surveyed, you're being watched by the government without, proper, basically with proper rationale. And the government did admit to spy on many Americans unlawfully, because even though these Americans had they had nothing to do with terrorism at all, there was no ties to terrorism at all, the government actually still was able to listen to on American conversations without warrants, wiretapping, spying on them through other means, through other forms of technology. And the 2001 Patriot Act allows that to happen. And the Patriot Act has actually been extended by multitudes of presidents, from President Obama, President Trump, President Biden. All that's been extended. So the 2001 Patriot Act is still in effect today. And this still causes a lot of consternation and concern by many civil liberties advocates, saying that this is too much power, and also that the Patriot Act is just way too broad, and it gives too much authority to the executive branch and allows Americans to be spied on without, any cause. And yeah, that's still in effect to this day. President Bush now creates his famous axis of evil speech, I should say, where he talks about North Korea, Iran, and Iraq as these three nations that you have to worry about in terms of terror funding, creating havoc in the world. And North Korea definitely was trying to create trouble with their nuclear warhead ambitions, and trying to, scare a lot of Asia, and definitely us, saying that they're going to be capable of, deploying a nuke and creating trouble with their nuclear arsenal. So North Korea definitely was a nation that was creating threats. And Iran was definitely not on our favorites list still during that time. Iraq, you had Saddam Hussein, and he was viewed to have weapons of mass destruction. And the government was actually making the case that Iraq, with Saddam Hussein, was making ties to Al-Qaeda, that they were going to be viewed as a threat and supporting terrorism. That is coming from the Bush White House. Major pusher of this was obviously Vice President Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, and as well as Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, as they were actually trying to argue their case in front of the United Nations, saying how threatening Iraq was. Well, the United Nations, the Security Council did veto that resolution that said that the United States should not be attacking Iraq, because they felt that the Security Council was actually doing its job with the investigations of inspections of Saddam Hussein and some weapon sites. But the United States argued the point that Iraq was building these weapons of mass destruction, and that they were going to use them, and they were going to create trouble. So the United States actually went ahead, disregarded the UN entirely, and did have their own coalition to go into Iraq again and basically have another Iraq war. So this was in 2003. And yes, in a military standpoint, the United States was actually able to just destroy the Iraqi army, get rid of Saddam Hussein, and they actually captured Saddam Hussein, and they toppled him and his government. And so Iraq looked like everything was going to be okay. The issue with Iraq, though, was insurgency groups, and this was led to the rise of ISIS, this terror organization that actually still exists today. Definitely not as strong as it once was, but it actually came about in much bigger strength with the toppling of the Saddam Hussein regime, and ISIS was actually able to fill in a significant void there. And so ISIS sets up shop in Iraq, also setting up shop in other parts of the Middle East, as actually they're in another area. All right. So ISIS is creating a lot of trouble for a lot of our American soldiers. You have a lot of insurgency groups that are causing trouble for our military. We actually had thousands of our soldiers die after the so-called war ended. This was actually during the peacekeeping time from 2003 and for, well over 10 years, whenever our army was there trying to stabilize the country of Iraq. And as we found out, the weapons of mass destruction that was said that Iraq had, we never found them. We never did. We looked for them. We looked at the sites, and there was definitely sites of weapon building once upon a time there, but there was actually no weapons to be found. And so now the American public, this was starting to get, Vietnam moments again, where people are getting very, very angry with President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney that they were led to a war, that they said that Iraq was supposed to be a threat, but yet, where are these weapons of mass destruction? where is this threat? Why are my sons that are in the Marine Corps, that are in the Army, that are in the Air Force, they're dying from this war. They're dying from, the peacekeeping portion of the Iraq war. They're getting, bombed and attacked by insurgency groups. And, what are we there for? You lied to us. And this definitely hurt President Bush's legacy. And it's actually a big reason why Dick Cheney is still so unpopular and so disliked today. So many people, they can't stand this man. They view Dick Cheney as a horrible human being, who was basically the main cheerleader of this Iraq war. And they felt that he was trying to go in there to basically set up war for profit. So this is all part of that military-industrial complex that people accuse our government being too involved in, and Dick Cheney was definitely part of the military-industrial complex benefit. And so that's what a lot of Americans say, right, even to this day. So the Iraq War had a very, very dark legacy as it comes out to, because many Americans now feel that we went in there with no real rationale, that we just went in there for other ulterior motives that had nothing to do with terrorism, that we're just trying to get revenge on Saddam Hussein, we're trying to basically set up our own type of government there in Iraq, we're trying to get maybe get some bigger influence in the world as far as the Middle East goes, and making sure that we have more friendly neighbors there. There's a lot of reasons that are going on there that people are accusing the White House of. But the main reason why we went to war there was that Iraq was supposed to be a threat, and they were supposed to have weapons of mass destruction, and those weapons never materialized. And then after the actual war, the actual hostilities, that you had thousands more Americans die from the peacekeeping efforts, from ISIS, from other insurgent groups, than the actual war itself. And this was very problematic for a lot of Americans, and they wanted us out of Iraq. And President Bush's popularity definitely suffered because of the Iraq War. But there were actually other issues that brought down his presidency as well, where he's now viewed as one of the worst presidents in our history. In 2004, President Bush was able to defeat John Kerry in the 2004 presidential election, as he won re-election and was actually able to strengthen his GOP advantage in the House and Senate, and he was able to get more legislation passed. The biggest one that would still have an effect to this day is the nomination of two Supreme Court justices, notably Chief Justice John Roberts, who now runs the court as of this day. So he was actually able to get Justice John Roberts in, as well as a very conservative justice in Samuel Alito. And so President Bush winning the 2004 election had definite significant impacts in how the country is operated today, as well as what decisions are made today at the Supreme Court. However, after 2004, there was definitely a lot of issues going on with the country. President Bush's presidency seemed to unravel in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. As Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, it actually did not directly hit New Orleans, as people think that it did. It actually did not. Hurricane Katrina was actually a very big hurricane. Okay, it was a decent-sized hurricane, as it was. My goodness, it was just one of the largest hurricanes that are recorded at the time, and it was coming to the shore at a high, with high wind speeds, just ready to churn out. It was going to do destructive damage. And it looked like it was going to directly hit New Orleans. But the hurricane actually moved a little bit further east, and it actually directly hit Mississippi, a section of Mississippi. It hit their coastline there. So New Orleans seemed to be spared from the wrath of Hurricane Katrina. But unfortunately, the walls, the levees that actually held the water in from coming into the city, those levees broke. Now, why are those levees so important? Well, the city of New Orleans is actually below sea level. The downtown, a lot of the area is actually below sea level. And New Orleans actually technically sinks, just a little bit each year. And New Orleans, being in this type of bowl shape of valley, the city is actually kind of in this bowl here, and it's kind of shaped like this. And those levees actually protect the water from coming in. And Once those levees broke, all the water just flowed in. All the water that was, coming from Lake Pontchartrain, coming from the Gulf, coming from the Mississippi, those levees that had breaches, those broke, and all that water just started to flood in, and it just created this absurd, disgraceful, horrifying disaster. And the reason why I say absurd and disgraceful is due to the response. The response of the government, the Army Corps of Engineers, and their lack of accountability at the time was just, it was beyond absurd. And the incompetence of the FEMA director, Michael Brown, was on full display, as he was clearly put in there as a favor to President Bush or whatever connections he had with. He certainly did not show that he was capable of running this large organization. As well as criticism was levied at Democratic Mayor Ray Nagin, as well as Governor Kathleen Blanco. But there was a lot of blame to go around, but most of the blame did focus on President Bush and his lack of response, especially from the FEMA director and the horrible leadership of Michael Brown. And New Orleans was basically in this, the residents were stranded for days, and there was just no coordination, and people were drowning, people were suffering. The city was just filled with sewage, filled with trash, filled with all this debris, and there was a lot of death around the people that were there. The people that were stuck on the top of their houses, the people that were stuck at the convention center, the people that were stuck at the Superdome, as it became just this disaster for everybody to see, as there was news coverage around the clock about the tragedy unfolding in New Orleans. And ultimately, about 1,500 people died in this hurricane. And it just was a horrifying scene that many Americans got to see firsthand. And President Bush's presidency simply did not recover. And then you add on to the growing unpopularity of the Iraq War. President Bush now was a liability to Republicans, and the Democrats were now able to seize on that in the 2006 midterms. President Bush's unpopularity still was a major problem in the 2008 presidential election, and it was pretty apparent that the Democrats were going to win the White House back in 2008. And President Bush was basically an anchor to his party now, and they asked him not to really participate in any political events because President Bush was so unpopular. And Dick Cheney, the vice president, was even more unpopular. And this was just a bad year to be a Republican. 2008 was definitely a bad year to be a Republican. So on the Democratic side, you had Hillary Clinton. She was going to be the chosen one for the Democratic Party. And that's basically what it was. She was pretty much the nominee. It was her turn. The party leadership wanted her to run the president, run for the presidency. It was basically her time. She had already had a successful run as a senator of New York, and she was a well-known name. But Hillary Clinton was still a very divisive figure, as people remembered her during her time in the White House, and she came off as very standoffish. She came off as very aggravating to a lot of Americans, and she was actually not well liked by a lot of women. She is viewed as a feminist figure, but a lot of women actually do not like her, and that actually does hurt her in the 2016 presidential election. So she is not a well-liked, universally liked figure, I should say, to put it that way. All right. So, but nevertheless, she still probably has the favorability, or she would be the favorite to win the presidency if she was guaranteed the nomination. The opponent on her side was going to be John McCain. Well, at least that was a hypothetical matchup, Hillary Clinton versus John McCain in the 2008 presidential election. Now, John McCain still had to earn the nomination. He still had to go through a primary, but he was actually able to win the primary in 2008. Hillary Clinton, though, it was pretty much a guarantee that she was going to win. It was pretty much, it was over. Some upstart from Illinois, impressive figure, spoke at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, and he was actually able to garner a lot of eyebrows and attention. But they didn't really treat his presidential campaign that seriously. A young Illinois senator by the name of Barack Obama, he was starting to get some attention with his slogan of hope and change and trying to get rid of the status quo. And many people were sick of the status quo at the time. And more people started to listen to this upstart from Illinois. And many Democrats were like, I like his message better. I like his message better of hope and change. I don't want to go back to the old political machine. And Hillary Clinton did represent the old political guard. That's, obviously her husband being president of the United States for 8 years in the 90s, and her being part of the Washington elite, already being part of the U.S. Senator class, being part of the U.S., being part of the Capitol here as a U.S. Senator from New York. People didn't want to go back to that. And so people started to listen to Barack Obama more. Senator Barack Obama from Illinois started to get bigger crowds. Senator from Barack Obama started to get more positive coverage. And then Hillary Clinton actually was starting to get asked tougher questions in debates. She was actually starting to get asked tougher questions in interviews, while it was perceived that that Barack Obama was getting easier questions in interviews, that he was treated kind of more lightly than Hillary Clinton. That was her perception. That was definitely the perception of former President Bill Clinton. So the primary got ugly. The primary got very, very ugly, got very, very contentious, because what was once thought to be a grand slam, an easy nomination for Hillary Clinton, now became a vicious fight where Barack Obama was now starting to win states he wasn't supposed to win. He was starting to make inroads in states that Hillary Clinton had in the bag. And now this became a very, very spirited, very animated, and left a lot of bitter feelings in this primary fight that actually still lingered. Former President Bill Clinton actually even got involved. And he actually started to get into some hot water himself with his comments that he made in regards to the nomination. So Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama got into this bruising fight, and some of the campaign ads got pretty ugly. And Hillary Clinton actually started to use some underhanded tactics that started to use Barack Obama's race as a negative. Whether she was actually part of that, definitely her supporters started to implement that in their campaign. And Barack Obama didn't forget that. And then President Bill Clinton, actually to this day, he still is very resentful of that Hillary Clinton got implicated in those negative ads. And Hillary Clinton didn't want to give up. Hillary Clinton didn't want to lose this nomination because it was hers. It was hers. But once Barack Obama started to get this momentum, and once he started to win these states and started to expand his win margins by a significant margin, now more people were ready to follow Barack Obama and his hope of change message. And Hillary Clinton, now she had to realize it was over. Can an African American win the presidency in the United States? Many people didn't think it was possible. Many people didn't think that this was going to happen in their lifetime. Well, Barack Obama was able to lead John McCain throughout the campaign. Only did it get kind of narrowly close, I believe, in August after the Republican convention, after John McCain actually introduced Sarah Palin, and he was actually able to get a bump from there. So the race got a little bit closer. Well, all that got to shreds, and it was going to be a clear day victory for Senator Barack Obama when the Great Recession took place, when the economy was about to crash. Now, what happened? Well, President Bush became not just an anchor, not just an albatross, but a downright concrete block. Whatever analogy you want to use that just weighed somebody down, that there was no way that he was going to go forward. All right. So in terms of what happened in the economy was in deep trouble. Okay, almost similar to the Great Depression, where people were lending too much money to people that weren't qualified. And in this case, it was to home equity loans, where people were doing a lot of these home loans, and then they were trying to sell them quickly and make a quick profit. That's where that payment just balloons up. They're paying small payments in the beginning of the loan, but then all of a sudden it balloons up. Okay, it's adjustable rate mortgage, right? And this is happening because a lot of people are taking advantage of these loans because figure it's easy money. Because you buy this house, you're not really going to keep it. You're hoping, well, I'm going to buy this house, but maybe if it gets, I can't pay it off quick enough, or I just really just trying to buy it and sell it and flip it and make a profit, I can do so, and there's going to be plenty of people to buy it. And that was going on. People were buying these houses, doing these adjustable rate mortgages, and then they were selling them at a profit. Banks were willing to lend this money to people that may not have had good credit because they were able to get buyers. If they're having trouble with the loans, well, that's okay. The bank can seize the loans, and then they can sell the house at an even higher price. So they're not going to lose. So they're always going to have, they're going to have a profit. That's the way they see it. So they're taking these risky loans, similar to what happened in the Roaring '20s. So they're making money off these loans. They're making money off profit, off selling all these houses. Well, all that crashes. All right. All that tanks. And now the banks have a liquidity problem. As people are now, all these things are starting to default, and they're starting to default, and it's getting pretty bad. All right. These banks are in deep, deep trouble. And President Bush has to announce to the world, and definitely to the public of the United States, that we are having to infuse $700 billion into our banking system, because without it, it's insolvent. Without it, there's no way that we can actually get our banking system in order, because without it, it's going to collapse. It's going to create this massive depression. All right. This is what's going on. And you're like, oh my God, what is happening here? What just happened here? And when that happened, all right, the next days we had huge stock market declines, because you're like, oh my God, our economy's in tatters right now. And people have defaulted on all these loans. People's 401ks are being hit. People's retirement plans are being hit pretty bad. And so you're seeing people lose like their portfolio value by at least a minimum of a third, if not half. It's getting ugly out there. And now we're going to this thing called the Great Recession. All right. It's not the Depression, it's the Great Recession, where you have this long period of economic decline, where it's not necessarily in dire straits of like the Great Depression, but it's still really, really bad, where people are now having a hard time finding work. People are having a hard time getting the stock market back up. And now people are having a hard time, making payments, because it's hard. Now it's real hard to get credit. So now the Great Recession happens, October 2008. John McCain is like, well, that's it. I've lost. That's pretty much it. And he had lost. It was over. And then Barack Obama was able to coast into the White House, winning the 2008 election by a relatively decent sized margin. He was able to win a large majority of the electoral votes. He beat John McCain, I believe, in the popular vote by, I think, a minimum of 7 points. And he was able to, bring a lot of hope that he's going to be a man that's going to bring change and help us get back on our feet. And Barack Obama, when he became president, he was able to work with a large majority in the House and Senate. He was actually able to do that, and he was able to, because like I said, being a Republican at the time was just horrible. You didn't want to be a part of the GOP because you were going to lose, because President Bush had brought the name down so much. So Barack Obama, now with a large majority in the House and a significant majority in the Senate, was able to push a lot of his agenda, his plans out during, because he had such a strong mandate. And he was actually able to do the plans of trying to do the American Recovery Act in 2009. He also was able to do the Affordable Care Act, the ACA. Everybody knows it as Obamacare, where there's now an option for the government to subsidize plans for healthcare for people that are having a hard time getting health insurance. So that is still in effect to this day. So that also took place in 2009 during this time. I believe also took place in 2010. So a lot of his plans started to get implemented during that time. And then President Barack Obama, he did actually start to get checked in 2010 because they thought he was going too far. And the Republicans, they were able to win the House back in 2010. They weren't able to win the Senate back in 2010. But Barack Obama now had to deal with the Republican House. All right. So now President Obama now has to win re-election in 2012. And in 2012, he's facing against Mitt Romney. The economy right now is still not doing great. The economy is actually in a slow recovery. Unemployment is still pretty high. Unemployment is still around 8 and 9%, and this is actually a pretty significant problem. And Mitt Romney, being a person that's viewed as a good man of business, part of running hedge funds, running part of Bain Capital, he's viewed that I can to get this economy back in order. I can really start to turn this economy around. That President Obama's recovery plans are simply not working fast enough, and this is actually should be a benefit to him. But Barack Obama and his campaign were able to paint successfully Mitt Romney as this out of touch venture capitalist that's just looking to seize opportunity, get rich at any cost, and not really care about the American public, and definitely not the poor. And that actually did get highlighted with a audio recording of Mitt Romney actually, being recorded at a fundraising event, saying that 47% of the country's on welfare and they're not going to vote for us anywhere, or they're on some type of government subsidy, so they're not going to vote for us anyway. So that clearly showed that he was out of touch. They viewed him as an elitist, and he never really recovered from that. Now, Mitt Romney thought he still had a great chance of winning. He still thought that he could win this out, and the people around him were telling him that he was going to win. But once those returns started to come in that he actually wasn't going to win, they were nowhere to be found. So Mitt Romney didn't even have a concession speech available on hand. He actually had to just create one. And it shocked him that he lost. But President Barack Obama was actually able to win re-election relatively comfortably against Mitt Romney. Now, President Obama, in his second term, he had a lot of controversy himself. And President Obama's second term was just mirrored, and just he wasn't being able to get much done. And in 2014, that really came into a head when President Obama now had to face a very angry public. And now the Democrats, there was no way that they were going to keep the Senate, and there was no way they were going to make significant gains in the House. So the House stayed in GOP hands. The Senate now was under Republican control. Why was that important? Well, at the end of his term, and around early 2016, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia died. He actually died at his ranch, or he died at a ranch. And now they had to fill the Supreme Court seat. Now, Antonin Scalia is a conservative. Now, President Obama is going to, he wanted a liberal justice, but now you had a Republican nominated, or you had a Republican Senate. And basically, when President Obama nominated Merrick Garland to fill Antonin Scalia's seat, even though Merrick Garland was viewed as more of a moderate, the United States Senate said, nope, we're not going to have a hearing. We're not going to have a nomination. We're going to just wait until the end of the 2016 election, and we're going to see what you're going to do about it. If the American public says, okay, we're going to have a Democratic nominee, they still might think that they're going to hold it off until the 2018 midterms. So, yeah, the Republicans now running the Senate, now they kept that seat open. Why is that a big deal? Well, now if you look at the Supreme Court, this seat that was probably going to go towards a more moderate, if not liberal, Democratic candidate, Democratic justice, is now held by current conservative, reliable conservative vote, Neil Gorsuch. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the 2016 election. Over 40 years ago, in the early 80s, President Ronald Reagan nominated Sandra Day O'Connor to be a justice on the Supreme Court. And of course, this was a huge deal, as Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman to be placed on the Supreme Court and, hold office there. Now, Sandra Day O'Connor was a Supreme Court justice for many, many years. And, now there have been multiple women that have now taken their place on the Supreme Court. The second one that got seated on the Supreme Court, her name is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, okay? Very reliable liberal vote on the Supreme Court, okay? Sandra Day O'Connor was more moderate. Sandra Day O'Connor did lean towards more of the conservative side, but she did vote on a lot of issues that favored the liberal section of the country, all right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg was definitely on the left. She was definitely a reliable liberal vote. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg got on board, and then the next person that was to be nominated by President Obama, he actually was able to nominate two female justices, Elena Kagan, a very reliable liberal vote for the Supreme Court, and then another reliable liberal vote, Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And this is due to the fact that President Obama was able to get, once again, he had the Senate. He had the Senate in his, under Democratic control. And so he was able to get Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor that were going to be, reliable votes on his liberal agenda. And that's just how that's the power of the presidency. They can do these things. They can nominate who they want, and they're going to nominate justices that are going to fill their agenda as best they think they can. All right, that's how that works. All right. So now with President Obama trying to nominate Merrick Garland and the Senate GOP holding that off, now the 2016 election is going to have massive consequences, but people just didn't realize how massive those consequences were going to be, because 2016, who's going to run? Who's going to run? Well, Hillary Clinton now says it's my turn to run. I'm going to run. I'm going to, pick up the slack, and I'm going to, win this nomination. Okay. Hillary Clinton now she was actually Barack Obama's Secretary of State, and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, they're not the best of friends. They never will be. But they did have a working professional relationship where Hillary Clinton was viewed as a respectable Secretary of State. Now, controversies abound with Secretary of State Clinton, especially with her email server, but that's for another day. But Hillary Clinton actually, and Barack Obama did have a relatively cordial working relationship, and she was viewed as a respectable Secretary of State. Especially in her hearing, she was able to hold her own against a very, very hostile Republican questioning panel. All right. Now, Hillary Clinton, she was going to win, right? Who was going to challenge her? Some upstart from Vermont? Well, he actually wasn't even an upstart. He was actually a socialist by the name of Bernie Sanders, and he was actually a relatively older Senator, Bernie Sanders, who was he was viewed as kind of an afterthought. It's like, oh, he's just there to collect dust. He's just there to kind of, basically be there just to, show that we're actually having a vote. It's basically Hillary Clinton's. It's her coronation. But the public didn't see it that way. The Democratic voter were like, no, we're actually listening to this, what this Mr. Sanders has to say. It's Senator Sanders. People started to listen to his Medicare for All message. People started to listen that they didn't want billionaires to be in this country, that their billionaires shouldn't exist, that they should be taxed to oblivion. And people were tired of the status quo. And once again, Hillary Clinton, status quo, being part of that, people didn't like that. People just didn't like how the country was going. And so more and more people started to follow Senator Sanders, and this primary became very contentious again. However, Hillary Clinton was able to basically have people running in the DNC, and whether people want to admit this or not, they were able to favor some of the rules and favor the superdelegates to go towards her and basically kind of undercut Senator Sanders' campaign. All right. Now, nevertheless, she did win, and that's just the rules of the game. That's just how it is. She did win the nomination. All right. So the nomination is hers. And who's she going up against? Oh, well, she's got all these Republican candidates that, Jeb Bush, he's not exactly very exciting. Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, he's young. He's got maybe a name for himself, but he doesn't really excite the country. Ted Cruz, well, he's viewed as a smart man, but people say that he's got a punchable face for good reason. All right, because he can be quite aggravating. Many people do not like Ted Cruz. Even people within his own party don't seem to like Ted Cruz. Well, some reality TV show running The Apprentice, kind of a washed up name. To be honest with you, his name was Donald Trump. He wasn't really that big of a name. The Apprentice was already been off the air for a minute, and Donald Trump was just like, I don't know. We have no idea what he was really trying to do here running for president. People thought it was a joke. People thought that he wasn't really going to do it. And comedians even treated it that way. And at the Correspondents' Dinner, Seth Meyers actually was the one that brought that up, and that actually started to get those that chain of thought moving, or that train of thought moving, that Donald Trump could be president, that Donald Trump was thinking about being president. Seth Meyers, Barack Obama, basically making Donald Trump the butt of their jokes about being president. Well, now Donald Trump was going to run, and his bravado, his confrontational style started to gain a lot of Republican eyes and ears because he was different. He was not part of the status quo. People were just sick of old school politics. People were sick of the Republican Party. Of course, people were sick of the Republican Party because they're the reason why they were losing the presidency to Obama in the first place. And the Republicans is actually what got them in the mess with the Iraq War. And many people blame the Republican Party for the 2008 Great Recession. Now, that was actually more of a bipartisan failure, but nevertheless, the Republicans were in charge. President George Bush was in charge when all this happened. So now, Donald Trump represented going against the status quo. Donald Trump represented that I'm not them. I'm not them. And he loved making fun of Jeb Bush, energy Jeb Bush, make Little Marco had all these nicknames for his rivals, Ted Cruz, lying Ted Cruz is what Donald Trump called him. And so this started to pick up steam. This type of bravado started to pick up steam, and Donald Trump, even though he didn't win the Iowa primary, he was able to win other states. He was able to win where he needed to win, and he started to just gain more and more momentum. And Hillary Clinton loved it. She's like, "Oh my gosh, if Donald Trump wins, then I have this in the bag." All right. After she was able to win her primary, she's just salivating that Donald Trump's going to be her opponent, and for good reason. Because Donald Trump is not well liked by a lot of America at the time. He just wasn't. In fact, he's still a very, very, a polarizing figure. You either really like him or you really hate him. There's really not much in between. And Hillary Clinton's just like, oh, I can't wait for Donald Trump to be in as the nominee. And Hillary Clinton was able to do a lot of negative campaigning against Donald Trump. She was able to do a lot of personal attacks against Donald Trump, showcase how he has no character and all that stuff. And Donald Trump was actually able to return that in kind to Hillary Clinton and her email server issues, her lack of moral compass in some issues, and actually able to use her own husband's scandals against her. And in the debates, Hillary Clinton actually would be viewed as a person that won those debates. But Donald Trump was actually able to hold his own, and especially in the second debate, after his Access Hollywood scandal became noteworthy news, he was actually able to hold his own in the second debate and probably get the most memorable line when he told her that, that after Hillary Clinton said that it's a good thing that Donald Trump isn't running justice in the nation's capital, right? Or nowhere near the Department of Justice, something along those lines. And Donald Trump basically told her to her face, well, because if I was running it, you'd be in jail. And it just got a large reaction out of the crowd. And people remember that line the most. And, that line actually was a pretty big deal because Hillary Clinton could not shake her conflicts of interest. She could not shake her scandal. All right. And Director James Comey started to investigate her email server scandal about her conflicts of interest, about the issues with the Clinton Foundation, and that got brought up near the end of the campaign, and people got reminded, when James Comey reopened the investigation to see what's going on with Secretary of State Clinton and her deal. Well, ultimately that nothing ever happened to that, but people got reminded of it, and at the end, people, once again, they just did not trust Hillary Clinton. They did not like Hillary Clinton. And many women did not like Hillary Clinton. All right? People just forget about that fact that, you did have a lot of Anglo women that simply did not like this woman. They just didn't. A lot of the public simply did not like this woman. All right? Whether you want to face that or not, that's just the truth of the matter. That is a lot of what people said in the exit polls. And Hillary Clinton should have won this race with ease. I think it was a 71% chance of winning. Some of the people had it at 81% chance of winning. Well, as the night went on, Trump had to win a specific set of states that seemed kind of impossible for him to win. He had to win Pennsylvania. He had to win Michigan. He had to win Wisconsin. He had to win these states in order to win the presidency. And winning Pennsylvania was just, a Republican hadn't done that since 1988, and or it might have been even 1984 if I'm not mistaken. But nevertheless, it just like there's no way he's going to sweep all these states. Well, as the night went on, he won Wisconsin, and then Michigan was looking favorable to him, and then he was actually able to win Florida with ease. Well, I should say he was able to win Florida with 2 points. He started to win Florida with ease in later elections, but he did win Florida. He did win Florida. He did win Ohio with a decent sized margin. They used to be a bellwether state, and now, now the real prospect of a President Trump was now coming to effect. And you're like, what's going on here? Hillary Clinton, their campaign, they're at the Javits Center, and it's just like they're ready to have this huge celebration. They're basically in this convention center where it's surrounded by glass, and they're supposed to have this large celebration where they're going to basically have pieces of fake glass breaking to show that she finally broke the largest glass ceiling, so she's going to ascend to the presidency. That was supposed to happen. But now the people in the Javits Center, they're now in stunned silence because they can't believe what they're seeing. That this man that they've wanted as their opponent, they wanted him as their opponent. They wanted him to go against them in the general election. Now he's on the cusp of winning the 2016 election, and they're just shell shocked. Hillary Clinton's campaign just goes silent. She goes silent. All right, everything is silent. People can't fathom what's happening here. And then at around 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time, Fox News calls Pennsylvania. And once Fox News called Pennsylvania, other networks were going to follow suit eventually. As Fox News called Pennsylvania, the race was over. That's it. The race is over. Donald Trump has now won the presidency of the United States. And this absurd thought that people thought it was absurd. People thought it was just unrealistic. People thought it was like, what kind of sick joke is this? And remember, the people that were pushing the sick joke, they wanted Donald Trump to run. Well, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. And that's exactly what happened. Donald Trump won the presidency. Now, did he win the popular vote? No, but that's not how the country is operated. You win the Electoral College. So he won where he needed to win. He won Pennsylvania. He did win Michigan. He did win Wisconsin. He did win Florida. He won Ohio, and he won Georgia. All right, and then he won other reliable red states. So he was able to win the presidency through that manner. And so now Donald Trump is now president of the United States. Okay, he becomes president in 2017. All right, Hillary Clinton, though, she does not concede right away. She does not concede right away. Her campaign tells her supporters to wait until the morning. They'll have something to say about it. They're actually trying to work the phones to try to see if they could find votes anywhere else. So Hillary Clinton, and her campaign are trying to find votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And they are trying. They are trying. Now, are they trying to, rig the system or anything of that nature? I don't believe so, but they are trying to see where they can find these votes. President Obama is the one that calls Hillary Clinton and tells her it's over. It's over. He tells her straight up, it's over. You need to concede. And after that call is called, okay? After Hillary Clinton does call to concede to President Trump, and this is even before Pennsylvania is called, I believe. All right. I think the other networks had not called Pennsylvania, and Hillary Clinton does call Donald Trump to concede. Then the other networks decide to call Pennsylvania and Wisconsin for Donald Trump. And this had profound consequences that we still feel to this day. Because when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, that seat was now filled by Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Okay, Amy Coney Barrett is going to be on the opposite spectrum of a Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, she's not as conservative as a Samuel Alito, but she's definitely very conservative. She's a very reliable conservative for the most part that is going to vote, I'd say, about 90% different from a Ruth Bader Ginsburg. All right? Neil Gorsuch now takes the seat that was going to be brought in for Merrick Garland. Neil Gorsuch now takes that seat. All right? Brett Kavanaugh now comes in and takes over a Supreme Court seat. And that was a controversy in itself. That's another story in itself. Okay. But you have 3 Supreme Court justices, Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, that are reliably conservative. And now you have a 6-3 court. You have a 6-3 court that is going to lean conservative. And now with President Trump back in charge with a Republican Senate, if a Republican does decide to retire, he's going to be replaced by a more conservative, or by a conservative justice, I should say. And the courts should stay 6-3 for a while. These are the consequences of that 2016 election. These are the consequences of that happening. Okay, President Trump now has the opportunity to probably put in more Supreme Court justices. So now, President Trump, that 2016 election has significant consequences.